Hello, and welcome to another episode of Strange Dominions. I am your host, Octavian Graves. Tonight, we are speaking with Aaron. Now, Aaron has had a few experiences and is new to the occult, and it is something we have bonded over. We've also bonded over our frustration in certain areas of the occult, which is what we go into tonight. We talk about her controlling storms, her saving a neighborhood, her experiences with magic, her expectations with magic, and much more. If you have seen something strange or unusual, such as a cryptid, spirit, UFO, or anything in between, please send us an email at strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com, because we would love to have you on the show. And now, for our interview with Aaron. And tonight, we are speaking with Aaron. Now, Aaron, you first reached out to me to thank me for coming back and let me know that you were a fan, which I greatly appreciate, because for the longest time, I could not get any feedback from anyone about whether they liked the show, whether they didn't like the show, what their thoughts on the show was or were. And so I really appreciate you coming on and talking about that. And you and I shared a mutual interest in the occult, but also a mutual disappointment in what we have been getting when we try and participate.
Yeah, I just really appreciated your perspective and just hearing someone else's story that I could really relate to, as well as blended with the other paranormal topics and cryptids. I personally also think there's a lot of overlap in those two areas. And as someone starting out on my occult path, it just really resonated.
That's really what this show is about, and that's what I want. If I'm going to provide any kind of public service, which I don't think I do, but if I were going to, that is the kind of service that I would want to do. So I know that you said you had some stories for us, and I know that you said that they aren't super fantastical, but I think people want to hear them, and I think there's going to be people who identify with what you've experienced. So wherever you want to start with that, please go right ahead.
Sure. So I guess the stories are a little bit of a blend of how things I experienced and how that brought magic and the occult to the front of my brain. I was a suburbs kid, raised in a greater metro area, but have always just been happiest in the outdoors and very close to nature. So as soon as we could after college, my husband and I escaped the city and we moved into the mountains, into a very tiny little town, and lived across the road from national forest land and designated wilderness. It's a pretty special place. And that's where the story began. We had been living there for about 10 years, and we had all sorts of little places that we would go off the beaten path, up in the woods, off trail. And there's a beach along the banks of a river that flowed near our house that was one of those really special spots we just came back to over and over again. And it was this beach that kind of sparked it all. So we were there on just a beautiful summer evening in July of 2021 and just enjoying the river, me and my husband and our dog. And it was about getting ready to leave time. It's getting into the evening, and a thunderstorm was starting to brew in the distance. We could hear the thunder happening. And something to know about this place is it's up in the mountains, but it's in a high frequency, high severity wildfire area. So living with fire on the landscape had been pretty normal for us, I would say. And this evening, something just started to feel a little different. And without really knowing what or why, it actually felt a little silly at the time. I just started feeling like I was supposed to do something or say something to the storm, to the sky. I felt like something bad was going to happen. Just one of those really heavy senses of foreboding that didn't make sense given the lovely evening we'd had so far. So my husband was there, and it just started coming out. I just started talking to the sky, feeling like there was going to be a thunderstorm that sparked a wildfire, baby. And we spent a few minutes. He just let me do my thing, super supportive, and just talked to the sky, talked to the storm, acknowledged that there might be a fire, told it what it was and wasn't allowed to do, where it could burn, where it couldn't burn, set some boundaries for it, and then drew a line in the riverbank sand with a stick. He helped me, and then we chucked that stick into the river. No idea where this came from. At this time, I didn't really have any interest in magic or the occult or anything like that. It was just a thing that happened. We didn't really talk about it or think about it after that. But then the next day, as it would happen, a wildfire started, not from lightning, it was human caused, but within a couple of hours, it had already spread to 1,000 acres and it was coming for our neighborhood and we had to evacuate. It was a pretty stressful time. But in the end, after this fire burned close to 80,000 acres all summer long, our home, our little neighborhood, and this spot on the beach on the river that I had designated as, you can't burn here, they were untouched. Now, I didn't put two and two together about this ritual because it was obviously a very stressful time, wondering what was going to happen. But weeks later, I had brought up this little experience on the riverbank with a neighbor. And she was the first one to really make a connection. She just looked at me with all seriousness and said, "You saved our neighborhood. You realize that?" I was like, at the time, a little taken aback. I was like, I don't think I saved the neighborhood, but maybe something happened. So that was and still remains a very powerful experience just in my life in terms of everything that went along with living through a wildfire like that. But still didn't put all the pieces together until a few more things happened. So about a year later, and I know a lot of times intense grief experiences can spark spiritual or religious impulses in people or just big life changes. I had a pretty significant grief experience when we lost our dog. She was just a couple months shy of 16 years old. We don't have children, we had our dog. And this sent me just looking for anything that I could do to honor her life and just process what had happened. So the very first intentional spell that I ever performed was just a simple candle spell offering to her, essentially, if there was anything that she needed, or just for her to know that I'm still here and still thinking about and loving her. And whether or not I did the spell right, I don't know, but knowing that it was a very emotional time, it was just therapeutic for me. It was a pretty big candle that I used, so it took several days to burn as I lit it each day. But every time I burned it, there would be the most intense thunderstorm that would break out right over our house. And that was very significant for me, considering the last real experience with a thunderstorm. These storms didn't feel threatening. We had since moved to a new place. We do now live on top of a mountain where this is occurring. So thunderstorms are not unusual, but it just really made me wonder how coincidental it was that every time I lit that candle, we would get a thunderstorm out of a clear sky, out of a cloudy sky. So that just made me really wonder if this sort of thing is somehow connected, what other dots are connected. At that same time, so I had been working with an astrologer since a little bit after the fires. I'd been referred to her by a mutual friend and just found a lot of value in consulting with her regularly. So we started talking about these things too. She's also a magical practitioner and gave me a lot of really good advice. One of the things that we had been talking about, given that I'd had such a very deep personal connection, even if I wasn't magically thinking about it with the place that I used to live, was trying to connect to our new place, maybe through an offerings practice or an introduction to the local genus loci or the land spirit of the place. So I did that, took her advice, and again, lit a candle, did something that I thought felt right, just really didn't have any sort of structure to what I was working on, but just said, "Hello, here's who I am. We're living here now. I'd like to give you offerings as a sign of respect and just hoping we can develop a good relationship." So sat with that, did a little tarot. I'm not very good at divination, so I didn't really get much out of that night. But something that I now also know is a thing is dreams can be a vehicle for spirit interaction, especially if you're a person who isn't particularly sighted naturally, who doesn't have like really easy psychic ability, let's say, without developing it as a skill. So that night I had it was the most intense and terrifying dream of my life. The setting was like in our home, in our new home. We had just moved in about a month prior. And there in my dream, there was a crack in the front door and just this enormous black wolf coming up onto our porch. and looking through that crack in the front door and just looking, it felt like through me, growling, very threatening, but didn't do anything threatening in the dream. I remember just getting right up to the front door and looking back at it through the crack. But it was so different because most dreams that you might have fear in, there's a particular flavor about that, but this felt like a very deep fear. I believe that was probably an entity, and I don't know for sure what it was, but I've come to think that it might have been a local spirit or the land spirit of the place coming to check us out, check me out, after I put up basically a spiritual bat signal. It's likely that the spirits of this place haven't been acknowledged or interacted with before, given the history of the land that it's on. So I decided to go ahead and just proceed with my offerings the next day. And that was the last really strange or scary experience that I had. And it was just a dream, but I like to think that perhaps the offerings left and the words said around that kind of helped this thing to understand what the intention was, perhaps. Again, I am not really sure.
I think that you are really onto something because, as I've talked about on the show many times, that dream incubation and spirits coming to you through dreams is backed up by over 1,000 years of magical tradition through almost every single magical culture and system. You getting a sort of dream response from your waking life offerings is very much backed up by tradition and history.
It's interesting too, because I've been a dreamer. Like my dreams are always very vivid and distinct. And as someone who enjoys that about sleeping, it was super interesting to have this just feel so different. And that really hasn't happened since. So it was also very unique in that way.
Yeah, it feels good when you have those big dreams that absolutely, they don't just feel like, it's almost, you just know that you were interacting with something objectively other than you.
Yeah. And like having that experience and all these other little breadcrumbs that made me go, what's going on? Those made me then think back to that initial experience with the fire. And I'm not sure I'll ever really know what happened, but I've come to start thinking about that as I bet there were spirits in that location, something I wouldn't have been thinking about or aware of at the time. But having spent so much time there, just talking to the place, it's always felt like a very nourishing place on the beach. And so it's also led me to think like, was there some sort of an interaction there? Was it spirits that gave me this little heads up that I just followed to say some words, or were they giving me a heads up in terms of there's something's coming, get ready, whether or not the words that we said and what our little impromptu ritual we did on the river really did anything in and of itself. So I'm thinking about that a lot, but all of these things leading up together, not very like huge or flashy or big bang results, have really convinced me that there is something to this. There's a connecting thread, that magic is real, and I want to learn all that I can about it. And just that really set me on that path that I've been on for the last 2-3 years now.
And what's so interesting to me is that my journey also really started in 2021. I started the podcast in 2022, but I had been doing a lot of Norse pagan type activities before that. And I had always written about magic in my music and entertained the idea and fantasized about it, but I was never actually one to do spells or try and summon anything. I had astral projected apparently the wrong way when I was a teenager in my ex-girlfriend's Wiccan cult or Wiccan coven. And I've had various paranormal experiences, but back then I didn't equate paranormal with magic. And it wasn't until my really mind-breaking mushroom trip in 2021, actually April of 2021, that I started to want to take just spirituality in general more seriously and focus specifically on magic and the occult. So there seems to be an awakening effect that a lot of people have experienced starting probably in 2020 and just amped up since then.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. The events that were unfolding in the world at the time and large changes or small nudges can put someone on a different path. And I think for me, it was like just a realization that spirituality can be more than what I was raised to see it as, which was very, very like Western Protestant Christian, mostly devotion based, to you can steer the ship too, an approach, which has been a very empowering thought. And working in partnership with these entities and being able to create real change in the world. I think, especially at this time in history, and for those of us who might not be in positions of great authority or great influence, it's just such an amazing thing to know that exists and that you can pick it up if you want to.
I fully agree. And I'm really impressed how early on you were able to pick up on very small, minute, almost mundane things in your life and realize that they were of a spiritual origin or a spiritual motivation. I've started to pay attention to these smaller things, but it's taken me a while to get out of the needing of big, flashy phenomenon results to verify my experiences and be able to look at very small, minute things, even down to feelings, instincts, and intuition, as being something else driving me or motivating me or showing me what is going on. So I think you should be very proud of yourself being able to pick up on that, because a lot of people, they never do. And it's only been recently that I've been able to identify these very small things. Whereas when I first started back in 2021, I would have just gotten really frustrated and not been able to see anything going on, let alone the really small stuff. Just pay attention to that and realize that is a skill that not everybody has or ever grows.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. I think there's a lot of things, like you said, like you might just take for granted or find as normal, maybe about just the way you go about experiencing the world. And paying close attention comes very natural to me, just having lived in the wilderness, in the mountains, getting very close to the small changes that signal like spring is on the way, or just very, I think it's a skill that was practiced in the very physical world and is maybe easier to spill over into this whole new world that I never really imagined existed. It also makes me think about the roles of like the relationships of magic and versus like high ritual magic, where you might be more transactionally interacting with something. So I've been very much more comfortable in the idea of a working relationship with spirits that maybe grows organically, which takes a very long time, but also does require that eye out for the little signs and the signals, or I don't know, some people might call them omens, but just those little nudges, I think. So for me, it's more, okay, so I feel like I can achieve that given enough time and a place, just the way that I live. And now it's been this focus of, okay, how do I take that and apply it to all these other avenues that exist? And so it's turned into sort of a mission to find out what's next. Candle magic seems intuitive to me. High ritual magic does not. And it's really hard to start learning about these things when you're a solitary practitioner, even with the internet. There's so much out there that doesn't quite give you everything you need.
I absolutely identify with that struggle, because I have been desperately trying to find more people to work with in person and learn from. I've never had an official mentor. I've had a friend or two who have been doing this for a lot longer than I have and have shown me things and taught me things. But I have not found that sort of dedicated individual who is invested in my growth as a magician or a witch and works with me to understand what it is that I'm doing and if I'm doing it right or wrong or why and things like that. And that's something that I'm still really searching for, because I'm doing everything by myself and I've read the books, but books, as minutely and specific as they are, they still are always a little bit too vague and they never give details where it matters. So it's hard to know if you start doing something, if you're doing it right. And if you don't know that, then you could just keep doing it and not getting anything from it and not realize that there was something missing that you were never told about, or you didn't know how to identify it. And so having that individual, especially in person, to give you those pointers, give you those tips, and so that way who you can go to about this and never feel like you're being misguided or judged or anything like that. It's a really valuable thing that we've lost. And I am fighting tooth and nail to get it back and to show the importance of it. So, yeah, being a solo practitioner, and it provides its own benefits and struggles. Now, I will say, I really fell in love with high ritual magic, the idea of evocation and things like that. And I fell in love with it because I wanted those flashy results. I wanted to have one-on-one direct contact with spirits where I heard them, saw them, felt them, all that stuff. And I won't lie, I still want that. But I have accepted and gotten more used to the idea of slow, meaningful building up of relationships and coming at something with much more equality than telling everything to do what I want because I want to. And I think that's a very unpopular mode of doing it, but that's how magic was done forever. It's only within the last 100 years that we started to have these very outward symbiotic relationship with our spirits in the West. I know that in South America, that's always been a thing. And in African diasporic religions, that's been a thing. And it's really only in European systems that there's been that kind of dynamic. But I completely understand where you're coming from, and I identify with it now a lot more than I did when I first started this podcast and when I first started my journey. So I think you're absolutely on the right path.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot too about the role of devotion in the Western esoteric tradition. A regular offerings practice feels like a form of devotion. And there's this idea, let's take Hecate, for example. You can have a devotional practice with Hecate, and then you can also invoke her in a lot of popular ones are found in the PGM, Greek Magical Papyri, which I haven't read. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about too. How do you set up a relationship with a spirit if it's in a transactional manner? Do you also want to have a devotional practice? Or if you start a devotional practice, maybe you should probably not go the traditional evocation route. But it also, I think, there seems to be a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation today in some of those rituals that talk about like finding a spirit, for example, which sounds pretty harsh, but I think I've never done it. So I would say people should try it themselves and see what their experience might be. But it sounds like to me, as an outsider, very harsh and limiting. And would I want to be friends with someone that did that to me after they did that on our first meeting, to then also think about it in the other direction, as this spirit or entity or whatever is being called might know more about you than you know about it, most likely. And it might just be part of setting up the right environment for a good interaction. So that dichotomy there really interests me.
Absolutely agree. On the topic of binding, I think that a lot of people, they hear it and they have an idea of what it is, and they usually imagine it's a very physical thing. And I probably thought that too when I first started. But when you read it and you read the actual process of it and the contracts, you realize it works a lot more like this. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at a gas station, and my boss was my boss, and it was a very employee boss relationship until probably the first 3 months or so. And then by the fourth month, he and I became very good friends, and he started going out to lunch with me and inviting me over to his house, and we played video games together, and we became very good friends. But there was still that contractual obligation because he was my boss and I was his employee. But we did end up staying friends even after I left that job. And what the grimoires and the PGM doesn't talk about is that once you've summoned the spirit and you've bound them by this very legal sounding contract, offerings are encouraged. Making not friends, but having that cooperative relationship that goes beyond a transactional one is encouraged, especially in modern practitioners. I think the idea of binding really is an insurance thing. And I think that when you really look at it from a human point of view, it seems only natural, because especially nowadays, the amount of times that I have met somebody who seemed like an all right person and ended up being a very not okay person, too many to count. And I've started looking people up and doing my research on people before I get to know them, just because I know what people are capable of. And I know I don't want to ever be blindsided by someone's potential, both for good and bad. And so this is a very long-winded way of me saying that the binding that's in the grimoire it's a place to start, but it's not the ending. And the ending looks very different. And the actual practice after the binding has taken place is very different from what people have in mind. So I definitely encourage people to research these traditional techniques because they go back a very long time and more or less unchanged. And I see that as a thing of an endorsement of it working by how many people have done it and found that this specific technique really works. And there is an evolution of these techniques that are not as coercive as they might sound. But I definitely completely understand where you're coming from. And I've definitely changed my mindset on that a lot in the years that I have been doing this and reading this and researching this.
Yeah, definitely, for me at least, seems like half of the beginning is figuring out your baggage and like what assumptions you're making based on this Western culture that we're in and this moment that we're in today. And there's a lot of what appear to be dichotomies that I think are probably false dichotomies, but it takes a little bit of digging, probably a lot more digging than I have already done to get to the root of that, to resolve that. Because I think there's this idea of what's real and what is perceived, and they could be two different things, right? And so some of that feels like it just needs to be learned by experience. And I was going to ask you a question actually, just about the idea of safety and magic. Because when you think about, the insurance policy of that binding, these things are powerful, and it's like interacting with another species that you don't know yet. As someone who works and has always loved animals, to me, it seems very much like that sort of a relationship where if you do the wrong thing, you might get kicked by the horse, but there is a way to not lead that to happen, right? And so this idea of exploring and using a set path because it might be safer, but then do you have maybe a false sense of safety? That's a dichotomy I've been struggling with and would love to hear what you think about it.
I think that's a very safe way of thinking about it, and it'll keep you safe. Questioning these kinds of set paths. Do you know about my story with the deer? Have you heard that?
No, I don't.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on this show. I was feeling very frustrated because I was doing the Sorcery of Hecate stuff as a daily practice and I was really keeping up with it. And I really wanted to feel, because I had heard people in the group and talked to people who have done it and said that they could feel a very physical presence of her when they did it. And I wasn't getting any of that. And so I talked to a friend of mine and they basically said, go and do an elaborate offering ritual and say that you're doing this offering to increase her physical presence in your life and to give you more verification that what you're doing is working. So I went out to this crossroads where I would do all my dipnons and new moons and full moon offering rituals and things like that. And I laid out the food, I lit the candles, I lit the incense, I said the whole thing. I don't know. You took the Sorcerer of Hecate class, correct?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so I did the whole thing that we're not allowed to talk about to anyone who hasn't taken the class, so I can't divulge any of that here. But I came to a specific part where a thing is repeated a certain number of times, and as soon as that was done, I heard something massive running down the trail, and I couldn't see anything because it was pitch black. And this massive buck deer runs at me and maybe stops 3 feet in front of me and then just darts off in the other, and like it's going straight, and then it's like almost runs right into me, and then it just turns at the very last second. Wow, it blew my mind and it scared the shit out of me. Almost literally, like that was the most visceral experience I've ever had with anything esoteric, in my opinion. It was September, hunting season was around the corner, but I can't convince anyone that doesn't understand what that feels like, but it's a feeling. It's just a feeling that you were just interacting with something that may have seemed totally normal and mundane, but there's no way in hell that was a mundane, normal experience. So I feel like I teetered on some very unsafe activities that night, not meaning to. I was just asking for what I wanted, and I got it in a very intense and in my face way.
Wow, that's a really cool story.
Thank you. I love that it happened now, but in the moment that's actually not true, because as it was happening, I was like, wow, this is really scary and really cool.
Oh man. Yeah, interactions with wild things and especially the symbolism of Hecate with the deer. In the moment, I've had a lot of interactions with very large, very dangerous wild animals because I just spent my entire adult life outdoors, basically in the wilderness.
As I have as well.
Oh man, yeah, it's really incredible. And yeah, that just like knowing that this just isn't a thing that happens. But it is really hard to relay.
Yeah, it is. And I understand why a lot of magicians, I've been trying to get more magicians and witches and magical practitioners to come on the show and talk about their experiences, and it's been very hard to get a number of them on, but I get it. I do. Because a lot of these things, they're nothing to anyone else but the person who experiences it and knows why it's important. And you can try and relate it, because I think you probably have an idea of what I went through, and I have an idea of what you went through, but I can't feel the emotions you felt when you had your experiences, and you can't feel the emotions that I felt when I had my experience. So you just have to soak up the interesting aspects of the story and try and put yourself there, but it never truly gets you to where the original person was.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think as a beginner too, just the role of emotions in magic is a really interesting thing to think about. Because when I think back, everything that I've done that has included some sort of a tangible result has been highly emotionally charged. And that's interesting because I'm sitting here wondering, is that a prerequisite for this, or just this idea of raising energy and that's one type of energy? Or is that emotional validation in a way I could see it becoming a bit of a trap, like you're just chasing the experience for the experience's sake, which is another one of those like dichotomy that can lead to hours of interesting internal discourse.
I definitely know where you're coming from, and I am somebody who definitely chases experiences for experience sake, because I love having experiences. I think that's what makes life worth living. Sure, if you've listened to the show long enough, then you've heard my rant about how the paranormal phenomena is walking in circles because of their obsession with proving and evidence. And I think that it's not possible, and we just need to stop. I don't see any reason why we need to prove it, because we've already proven it to ourselves, and I don't know who else is more important.
Yeah, that validation. I think, especially as a beginner myself, like looking for validation externally was a big deal. And that's something that I've resolved a bit for myself as well. It's like this need for proof, this need for validation, this need to try to do a spell for an orange golf ball to show up in my driveway to prove to myself that it works in a moment of doubt. What's going on for me in that moment is probably a different thing than what's happening with the magic. And it brings it back to this idea of why walk this path in the first place? Why put all this effort and time and getting up at weird hours to do the astrological electional magic and et cetera, when all I've got for it is maybe help me win a raffle or two and just feel generally like better about certain aspects of life. Yeah, I think I'm looking now to go deeper into these historical things and see what it was that the folks in the 13th, 14th century were doing, as well as blend it into a practical tool that can be used in today's world. Like you mentioned the paranormal just a minute ago, and it's so funny. While I was taking the Hecate, the Sorcery of Hecate course by Jason Miller, one of the things that I thought about doing was asking, oh, I wonder if I could use this to learn about Sasquatch that are said to be around in high numbers in this place that I live now, or Dogman, for that example, is another one that's been reported in this area. Never quite figured out how I wanted to go about that, but that idea came to me, and then I ended up finding your podcast like shortly thereafter. And so I think that was a very interesting link that I didn't put together until just recently.
I can't think of a higher form of flattery for me than my podcast being an emanation of you getting what you want from Hecate. I think that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. But you know me, like I'm exactly on the same page as you. I absolutely want to ask Hecate how to contact these entities and learn more about them. I'm one of these people who, when I started the podcast, when I started the Sorcery of Hecate class, I wasn't in a place physically to really do a lot of the stuff that was in that course outside of just the very basic daily stuff. And now that I've moved and I have a domain of my own that I can do whatever I want with, I'm slowly working my way through the lessons from lesson 1 and getting all the materials needed and the tools and things like that, so I can actually start doing the more active, almost evocative magic that is associated with that course alongside the daily devotional aspect.
Yeah, that seems like something that would be really valuable, is to blend the two, where I feel like I'm landing like a pure devotional practice coupled with practical work in the world. For now, at least, seems like the direction that I would like to explore as well. I think that in my head, there's a difference between magic and mysticism, but the two can be blended for sure. And I think this type of approach is one that speaks to the purely spiritual goals, as well as what can we do in the world to make the world a better place, whether it's our lives or the lives around us or the environment around us, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. One of the things that I have just started conceptualizing is an ancestor practice, because I've always wanted to do it, but again, didn't have the space, didn't have the real method of doing it. But now that I have the space and the methods, I'm going to start in place doing that. And I'm very interested in having spiritual allies to assist me in my both mundane and arcane goals of living a more prosperous, happy life and a more magical and mystical life. And those two goals absolutely work in tandem together, I think. And having those spirits by your side, whether it be Hecate or land spirits or your ancestors, it's the most mystical way I can think of to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I think a lot about maybe going back to that place I used to live and visiting that spot on the river. Now that I have some more of these tools available to me that I've learned about, and seeing what I can do to maybe make a more intentional contact with whatever was there that I spent a decade talking to on the riverbank. But yeah, like where we live now is also, I've been a bit resistant to trying anything out in nature necessarily, mostly because I don't want to bring like candles into the woods, but figuring out like what is something that I could do in some of these sort of like power spots that you just feel there's something different to them. We have a bit of land here and there's a natural spring on it. And everyone I've ever talked to, there's a lot through history about the power of natural springs. And so that's been a place of leaving offerings and just treating with a really high level of respect. I think of it as like a crossroads, because it feeds this pond where a lot of animals come through and take nourishment and refuge in that area on the land. So in a way, I've been a little hesitant to barge in and start doing ritual, but I think there's a way that could balance like a respectful, gentle approach with maybe a more active, like knocking on the door of whatever dwells there.
Absolutely. There definitely is a way. I think that starting off with an offering practice to that element and then seeing what your results are with that, whether it be in dreams or trying divination, because I'm not very good at divination either, but I have been trying with tarot. Again, I've been honestly looking for tarot classes because the books are nice, but really having that experienced individual who can tell you yes, no, why and when and how, it's so valuable for somebody like me who just really appreciates direction, because I'm a very chaotic person. So direction really helps me. because I have a hard time creating a direction for myself, and having someone who I trust give me that direction is something that I very much feel would improve my magic and help me progress as a practitioner.
Mm-hmm. What you said about direction and maybe structure kind of resonates with me, because I feel for someone newer who's looking through books, who's looking for what do I do, I think I'm still looking for what resonates, but have also learned enough by now to know that it also has to do with discipline and putting the work in. It's like the idea of a calling to do something versus just being interested in something, and that's all, that's enough. You don't have to have any more reason than that to learn it, versus like inherent talent, or like you come from a lineage of witches or magical practitioners, versus just learning the skill and putting in the practice. For me, it's been tough finding a trustworthy source that also resonates, because you just don't know until you dive into a 7-month long course with someone who's very accomplished. But there's also that disconnect of ask questions, but I'm not even sure I'm asking the right questions yet. It can be really tough as a beginner.
Absolutely. And that's what I struggle with, is that, am I asking the right questions? Am I going in the right places to find these things? And how will I know if I'm going in the right places? Because instinct, if you don't have that really strong innate psychic instinct and intuition, what you feel is right and what is calling to you in the moment might be totally misguided, but you just don't have any way of knowing. And that's when you get into real danger.
Exactly. Yeah, am I supposed to be feeling something while I'm doing XYZ ritual over here? I'm not really feeling anything, but
that's
if it
what
works, that's all I need.
That's what I struggle with the most, is having that kind of physical resonance when you're doing stuff. Because I'll hear people say, oh yeah, I feel like a lightning bolt down my back when I do spells, or I feel tingling on these specific areas and when I'm doing rituals, and that's how I know something's there. I don't get anything, really anything at all. And I get frustrated pretty frequently by that. So yes, I would like to hope that is a universal experience with people who are not psychically gifted or innately gifted with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another challenge that it just might be like the fashion of the times, I'm not sure, is the heavy emphasis on things like visualization. For me, that's been very tough. Like, I own a wild imagination, and it is very 3D when I'm not trying to focus. But then the minute like you're supposed to visualize an image, or even when it comes to path working or things like astral travel, it just breaks down immediately. It's okay, what do you do now? Because the instructions say. So those times are like when I think it would be the most valuable to have a phone a friend or a buddy who can speak to that experience as well.
Absolutely. And visualization, I suck at it. I'm really bad at it. Like you, I have a really vivid 3D imagination, but the second I have to focus it and like constrain it into this specific image, it's almost, there's this black translucent haze over my imagination with whatever I'm trying to visualize. Does that make sense? It's like there's like a smoke screen in my mind trying to see these things. And when it comes to, especially because the Hecate stuff, what I can say is it's very heavy on the visualization.
Oh, yeah.
I've had to just basically say, I'm going to try my best and whatever I get, and just hope it works and hope I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. And then just like waiting for the results, essentially.
Exactly. Like I can say that through the Hecate course, I was able to land a job that I should not have gotten, that I really messed up my first day, and there's no reason why they should have hired me, but they did hire me, and it was because I know that I did working with Hecate and some other figures in that arcana the night before, and I got a pretty instant result. I've gotten practical results before. I've gotten results with my taxes. I've gotten results with lottery tickets. I know that magic is real, and I know that it can help me a lot in my life, but there's still like this part of me that wants that kind of Hollywood style interaction with the spirits that are working with me.
I think looking for the Hollywood stuff, like I'll admit it, I want that too. I think that would be cool. I also understand that's not necessary for things to work practically. I think someone who I have been able to trust, and maybe my closest version of a mentor, although it's not like formally engaging that way, is my astrologer, who helps me a lot. And I do think that there's something to be said for like having someone who might be working in a tradition that you're not necessarily trying out yourself can also be good advice. I don't know. I wonder how people did it like the first time when there was no mentor, and how it probably was just part of the daily life and pretty normal.
See, I think that's where the hang up is. I think that they did have mentors. I think, especially if you look at the Eastern traditions, they have this unbroken chain of student master apprenticeships when it comes to magic and their spirituality. And that's why they have such a whole, like a complete system, where most of our systems are completely fragmented, because we did have a master apprentice style to the magic. And somewhere along the line in culture and culture, like magic culture, we got really individualized and we separated. And now to find someone who is willing to teach you, you have to back it up with your wallet. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't teach magic for money. Like, I definitely think that's a worthy goal and a worthy thing, but there's a personalization that gets lost when you know the only reason this person is talking to you is because you're paying them.
Yeah, it's something that I think is necessary in a way. I wonder how the apprentice relationship worked. Like, was that also, what's their skin in the game? I think money right now can be a proxy for skin in the game if someone's going to invest their time in you, especially when it's a topic like the occult or like magic. I also think that can be a really big barrier to entry. I have discovered Josephine McCarthy was someone who was suggested to me by my astrologer, actually, is one place that I might look. She offers a lot of free, her entire Aquaria course is free. And it's also doesn't come with a mentor for the first third of it, which is a little bit frustrating. But it's just tough, I think, to try to go it alone and wonder if you're doing it right. And then how much skin in the game in the form of your wallet are you capable of putting forward? It's a way of, like I said, like weeding out the folks that might not be that committed or might not be in it for a genuine reason, but it's also just another modern barrier, I think, to this path.
I agree. I definitely agree. Josephine McCarthy, she's interesting because I've also been recommended her and I've looked into her stuff. And my only problem is, even though it's free, it's entirely, literally entirely vision based and visualization based.
Yeah.
And that's a big turnoff for me. Not because I don't like visualization, I just suck at it. And I want a more hands-on materia form of magic. That's my favorite, when it's tools and candles and robes and incense and circles and knives and keys and like stuff that I can hold, because I am ADD and I like holding things and just doing everything in my mind. It gets really bungled in there. So being able to get out of my mind and work in the real world and go out into the woods and hope to interact with something in the real world is something that is very attractive to me. And I've gotten used to visualization because of the Kate stuff. I still suck at it, but I'm still like doing it. But it's definitely not my favorite mode. It's not something I use in anything else. In my own private devotional that isn't attached to a class or an arcana, there's no visualization there. It's just me talking and reading and trying desperately to use my pendulum, which I don't think I'm very good at, or trying to decipher the tarot stuff that I've done and doesn't seem to make any sense to me, especially compared to what I've asked, things like that. But I still feel more comfortable with that than I do with visualization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the same experience I had with Josephine's material. The first thing you start working on after meditation is visualization, and the visualization is part of the meditation. So it's that, oh boy, here we go. And yeah, like the Hecate course is 7 months long and includes daily work, including visualization. And I thought, maybe if this is a skill that can be improved, I'll see how much I can improve it through this length of time. And to this day, it's no. I don't know that it's ever going to happen for me, but it's also one of those things where it's, yeah, I wonder how long does it take someone to learn this skill if they can learn it at all? And when do you decide it's just not the path that's really going to be yours? Is it a zero sum game, or is it that, like I'm doing, I found myself after that course concluded just really leaning back into my original nature based, relationship based, talk to the plants witchcraft. Although I don't claim any particular title like witch or sorceress or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. Part of me wonders if I'm just giving up a little prematurely too.
What I can tell you is that my visualization has not gotten any better since starting the course, and I still do it every day. I've faltered for months at a time, but I always pick it back up because the visualization is hard and I suck at it. I have gotten real world results and I have gotten real world phenomena, both with getting the job and the deer. So, and one thing that I'm trying to do is, if you've read Jason's books, then you know that there's a couple different sort of invocations to nature spirits to build up that relationship. And there is a way, I haven't quite figured out how, but there is a way to do that in conjunction with the Hecate course that will bring you that sort of nature-based spirituality while also venerating the Queen of Witches. Did you take the Hecate 2 or 3 course?
No, it was a little outside the budget for now, but yeah, they sound interesting.
I think if you ever have the opportunity to take them, I would definitely, because like I'm gearing up. Like I've taken all 3. I've finished all 3. I have all the audio files. I haven't done all the practices for them, but I'm gearing up to, because there's a couple that do put you in direct contact with something in certain ways, which I will talk to you about when we're not recording, because I don't want to break that oath. But if you ever get the chance, I think sticking with the Hecate thing and progressing through it, or quote unquote going beyond, as Jason likes to say, I feel like there's merit in it. And that's big for me to say, because I've been so against visualization since I started in this whole world. And I really have no use for it outside of the Hecate stuff, but it's part of it. And I have gotten enough results from it to be able to say that it's worth continuing with, at least for me.
Yeah, I find myself being really grateful that there have been a few experiences that seemed significant personally. Otherwise, I'm not sure how much time I would still be willing to devote to any of this. It's such a mystery. I think it's called the occult for a reason. And I'm starting to believe that perhaps the searching is part of it in a way. And yeah, I think like working hard and being willing to do that for years. If this is truly going to be a lifelong practice, you've got to put in the time. So for me, that's just where I'm at on my path, and why I found it encouraging to listen to some of your podcasts that you'd put out, and others that are out there. It is so individualized, and it's there if you just keep trying.
Absolutely. I 100% agree and endorse everything you just said. I am currently starting the process of working on a book that takes all the hypotheses and theories and ideas that I've put forth on this show and puts down on paper. So I'm excited for it. I hope that the people who have been listening to me and really hearing what I've been saying, more so than just enjoying a podcast, will appreciate it and be able to put it to use in ways that it's intended to. And that goes for you too, because it's absolutely the marriage of cryptids specifically and magic. That's the first one. I'm hoping to make a series out of it, but cryptids is the first one, and so I'll be able to divulge more on that as time goes on and I really start writing it. I'm going through sources right now and building up my case. But yeah, and I agree, it's a lifelong thing. I think the thing that I struggle with is I fantasized about it my entire life, and I didn't start really dabbling in it until I was about 24 or 25. I'm 28 now. There are people who have been really doing it and getting results with it and having experiences with it since they were like 15 years old, and I'll never not be envious of those people who've had all that time and worked through it that, for this long. And I'll never get that. But I try really hard not to think about that. It's hard. It's really hard because I also have a fear of time, but it's something that I struggle with. So yeah, there's always that element to it.
I'm envious of everything that you just said. You've got a good 10-year jump on me. So yeah, I think things come to us at the right time in our lives, and fate is part of it. And we get that choice to step into it or do something else. So no, that'll be exciting. I'm excited to hear that announcement.
Thank you. I'm excited to make it. It'll be a while before I do that. I'm going to be working on it, but I won't start talking about it until I start having stuff on paper and things like that. But yeah, Aaron, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been an absolutely fantastic chat, and I think it's going to be really helpful and motivational for other people to maybe come forward and just want to talk about their journey, not even their experiences or their results, but just like what they've been going through along in this world. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think we covered it pretty much. I'll just echo, I hope that this conversation encourages other beginners, and maybe it lights a spark for someone or helps them see a connection or a pattern in their own life, maybe in those small details that they might not have noticed before, that can help inspire them on their journey.
Amen. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I really hope you have a great night.
Thank you. You as well.
And that was my interview with Erin. Erin was a fantastic guest. Really enjoyed having her on the show, and maybe have her on again soon. As always, if you've had your own experiences or non-experiences and just want to come on the show and talk about magic and the paranormal, I am absolutely game to do that. Just send us an email. As always, we will see you again on the Strange Dominions.